Hello, and welcome to the Future of Tourism podcast. First, I'd like to do something I've been meaning to do for weeks, and that's thank our producer, Alton Wells, for all his great work on making this podcast happen. My guest today is a bright young CEO who works with more than 800 destination marketing and management organizations around the world. He's a formally trained engineer whose passion led him to develop one of the most important user-generated content management companies in the tourism sector. In 2011, Dan Holowack, CEO of Crowdriff, was well ahead of the curve when it came to seeing the critical role of UGC in the tourism consumer's buyer decision process. He went further. He took those insights and sat down to build Crowdriff, arguably one of the top industry leaders in developing and delivering tools and processes that allow DMOs, destinations, and tourism stakeholders to leverage the massive pool of compelling imagery and stories generated by travelers. As we come out of this crisis, the visitor, more than ever, will seek authentic, peer-validated content to help them make travel decisions. They will look for destinations where tourism and daily life are clearly integrated and symbiotic, and Dan is hard at work helping to make that happen for progressive destinations. Good morning, Dan. How are you and where are you today?
Good morning, David, and thank you for that kind introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm calling in right now from a condo here in downtown Toronto, Canada, and it's a nice sunny morning, which means a lot, especially in times like these, to have the sun shining on any day it can right now.
Dan, let's talk about the early days of Crowdriff. What drove you and how did you make it happen?
Well, I actually had the opportunity to join a destination marketing conference many years ago. And at that time, I was working in the area of user-generated content across Twitter and some of the early social media platforms. And then I went to this event. I ended up meeting a number of destination marketers, and I just fell in love with the people. Actually, before I even fell in love with the industry, I would say. I realized that there was a way that I could work with these amazing individuals that were really creative, extremely dedicated. And it made me very curious from that moment onward how we could take the technology that we had been building and the belief in the wisdom of the crowd and what consumers were sharing online, and how that could apply to the travel and tourism industry.
So you've been working for nearly a decade to realize that vision. It would be easy and fair to say it was an early adopter proposition for the first 6 years of that decade. And in that early adopter world, what are some of the challenges you see as destinations shift from traditional models of communication and marketing to user-generated content? How did you manage that?
Well, like any kind of early adopter stage of something new, it's about the people that are already thinking multiple steps ahead and already believe in the core principles that were driving us. And I often tell the story to when we hire new folks onto the Crowdriff team. I tell them the story of this call, one of these first calls I had, which was actually with Josh Collins at Franklin, Tennessee. And I remember calling, and of course I didn't know Josh from anybody else at the time, just called him up because I had met him at this conference. And I said, hey, Josh, we've created this way that we could bring in all of these photos being shared about your destination from locals and from visitors, and then showcase them on a social hub or on your website. And he's like, wait a minute, Dan, you're telling me that the locals and travelers in my destination can authentically tell the story of our brand? And I was frantically writing this down as he's saying this, thinking like, and I just said, yes, that's what I'm saying. And I realized, after that, you met 4, 5, 6 people like that were already believing that, the brands were becoming more tangible, more human, that consumers wanted to have that authenticity and to have that more raw storytelling that's less sort of like touched up, I guess, in a way. And once you find those people, you just connect and learn from them, learn a lot from them, that can help guide you.
So UGC is being really well used in a lot of places, and your contribution to that is undeniable. In a Skift interview this week, you talked extensively about the concept of a new normal, though, and things weren't status quo as we go forward. You and I both agree completely. User generated content, peer validated information, listings, all of those things are critically important. But tell me, what do you see in that new normal? What has to change with the way we build, run, manage, deliver, and capitalize on tourism?
Well, I told our team this, several weeks ago that, and I think everybody's been talking about this, how um, the world is forever changed. And as we've been moving through this crisis, we have to recognize that the changes we're seeing will change our futures forever. And in many ways, it is going to accelerate change. Perhaps it's going to compress the amount of change that we would have seen over the next 3 to 5 years into this year specifically. Um, I think that uh, consumer expectations are rapidly changing through this. So the need to build consumer trust will be extreme as a result of this. We have to help consumers trust that it's safe to leave their homes, then that it's okay to walk down the street and visit a local business, then that they can get in a cab, then they can take a road trip for a weekend, then they're going to spend multi-thousands of dollars on an international flight. Like, each of those stages is going to take a coordinated effort across several different stakeholders focused on building that consumer trust. And UGC is a component of that, but really what that stands for is building trust, is being able to tell a story so authentically that a traveler can observe a local doing something and say, if that person lives there and they're having this experience and they did that 3 days ago, it feels more safe to me because they know that place and they feel safe in that experience, safe in that, in that destination. And people are going to want to see others participating in that. And so it's just this crisis has been devastating, certainly. But it has created an opportunity to rebuild an industry and to take all the learnings that we've had over decades and have an opportunity to apply that, because a crisis like this creates a scenario where it's a unifying force. And I think that through that, there can be a lot of positive things.
Well, and I want to zero in on something you said there because I think it's really encouraging. In the midst of this, in the current situation today, and we're talking the beginning weeks of May 2020, it's difficult for DMOs to imagine their new role. And when we throw all this at them, they at a time when not only are they disadvantaged because everywhere is closed, but they're looking at budgets over the next year and a half, 2 years that are significantly lower. They're thinking, but how would I make the shift to that now? But you said something really interesting, and I think it's woven throughout your thinking, and certainly you share that with Greg Oates and Randy and Trevor Tagat, who've been on the show before. It's not about the DMO doing all those things. You said it's going to take an industry. It's going to take better links between the airlines and the destination, better links between the destination and the stakeholder, better links between the civic body. Talk a little bit about that. Where are you seeing that happening, and how's it working?
Well, I think that DMOs are, in a way, they have an opportunity to get back to their roots, I guess I would say. Like, destinations, I believe at the core, are destination builders. And I know that when I say that, you probably think like economic development must be the destination builder, or maybe that's the municipal government. But I think that all of these organizations actually share a common goal in that the destination has is afforded the privilege of being able to be a brand that can communicate with people. I think more so than some of those other organizations. And so they have a role now to not only start by sharing messages of health and safety locally, but the destination can act as the brand and that sort of more human voice behind how locals can have new experiences in their communities, what businesses are opening up. So I think that the DMO has a very big opportunity here to be that connector. I've always believed that DMOs sit at this intersection of sustainability, community, and tourism, which really is economic growth. And it's important that right now, I think destinations are going to reconnect with that community piece. I think that's going to be really exciting.
So let's talk about the catalytic pieces or tools that we can use to do that. How, in even in the middle of this crisis, it's difficult to imagine how you begin or re-begin or reinvigorate stakeholder engagement. I think your point stands. It has to be done. The best destinations are the product of engaged communities that take an active role. In the past, we've used a number of tools to get to that on-ramp. Destination Next has been really helpful. We've used it in a number of situations just in Ontario alone, and it was the catalytic first piece to bring those stakeholders together to begin that alignment to build a network. Similarly, Destination Think, we used them in Stratford. What other opportunities do you see now? And I'm sure Crowdriff is hard at work thinking about this, to bring these people together in order to begin to forge that closer stakeholder, civic, supplier relationship, which I think the consumer, as David Ogilvy said, the consumer is not an idiot. The consumer is your husband or wife. The
Yeah.
consumer demands that now. They're going to want destinations where they trust those destinations civically, socially, medically, are really well integrated. So what's Crowdriff thinking and all that?
Well, from a stakeholder engagement side, the the destinations that have already placed a high priority on engaging those stakeholders, I think, have already built pathways, which they are now leveraging those pathways now to have a dramatic and positive impact. Um, but as this crisis creates this unifying force, what I mean by that is, at this moment, nearly all of your stakeholders have the same problem at the same time. And so instead of going to your stakeholders and saying, "Hey, do you have this problem? We're going to launch a campaign to help, 12% of you. Hey, do you have this problem? Hey, do you have this problem?" And they're like, "No, I'm good with that. Oh, maybe that." It's like, no, we all have the same problem. So if I can come to the table as a DMO with a strong sort of unifying approach to this, it's a moment where you can be there for what you all like. Those are your customers, of course, and so you can be there for your partners at a moment where they need you most and where they need you in the most unifying way, and you can be the most targeted and laser focused. So what we're seeing, of course, with Crowdriff, what we're seeing is a lot of people are creating galleries of photos and videos that are celebrating local heroes. And they are business owners that are doing some incredibly creative things, really just heartwarming things to keep their businesses running and operating. They're also connecting with community. I recently saw Visit Indy do something where they posted a page where you could make a video about the first thing you wanted to do when things started to reopen. And they've had people submitting like vertical video, people and families and business owners uploading this original video content for the destination. And so I think in one case, it's how do you support your stakeholders? How do you drive, of course, traffic to those stakeholders? How do you make sure you know who's open, what they're offering? Many of them change their menus, the products they're offering. And the second piece is, how do you connect with your community in a way that arms you with the content that is going to propel you through that final sort of thrive and grow stage, where it's going to be hyper competitive for the early demographic of people that are prepared to travel again.
Well, interesting in there. You and I both grew up in and around Toronto, and we know City TV. And back in the '80s, City had this cool presentation of taking you behind the scenes, showing the camera in the shot, showing the newsroom working. Truth of the matter is, working there, it was because we didn't have any money, so everything was guerrilla style. But it became a really authentic presentation of a community back to itself. When you're hearing the story of the blacksmith or the butcher or the brewer in Fort Worth, it's a little bit like going behind the curtain. And I've always found that people love to see how things work, whether it's an airplane or a
Yeah.
destination. So I understand that compelling nature, and I am more intrigued by Fort Worth when I hear about the blacksmith, and I do
Yeah.
reference experiences that I've had in destinations where you've got to meet this guy who raises rabbits, and it sounds absurd till you go, and then all of a sudden you're saying, wow, that was one of the coolest experiences.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. That idea of the story behind the story is also the kind of thing that sometimes is hard to script. Like you can't build some kind of a production plan for it. Either that magic happens and you happen to be filming and capture it, or it's created and it's shared online. And I'll always remember this moment. This is from the UGC side, but I remember this moment that there was this video from a hiking trail in Colorado, and this father's hiking with a daughter in the backpack, and he just turns around and they high five each other. And it was just like this really genuine moment. And I was like, those are like those little moments that you end up capturing, not because they're scripted or planned. But these, as I mentioned, the small businesses are doing so much to the point where some of them are thriving digitally now. They're opening, many of them are opening online commerce stores. A lot of the restaurants in Toronto are offering grocery boxes. I was trying to get a flour subscription for actual like flowers, although flour to bake with is hard to find too.
As is yeast.
Yes, yeast and all. It's so interesting, this world we're in right now. Apparently, trampolines are hard to find because all the parents are buying them for their kids in the backyard. So now there's a trampoline shortage.
Well, hang
so
on.
many weird things.
How does that line up with ER room visits, though?
Yeah. Unfortunately, on the podcast I heard this on, yes, there was a sprained ankle that happened pretty quickly.
Keep going.
But I was told that this flower shop, local flower shop, all the flowers are grown locally in Ontario, and they had a flower subscription, and it's so popular. It's been so popular recently. They did a flower drop at midnight. They would post a story on Instagram, like you do a shoe drop for like some great sneakers, and I couldn't buy it fast enough. I got in there 6 minutes after midnight, and all the subscriptions were gone. And so you've got, on the one hand, there's of course like a lot of challenges being faced, and then a lot of these businesses are moving to Instagram. Some of them for the first time, they're building online stores for the first time. I think that, again, coming back to destinations, the ability for a destination to help educate and help digitally enable those stakeholders, again, is like a form of leadership that's needed now more than ever too.
So in there, you talked about the idea that some of this great content, and in fact, most of the really great content, you can't script it. It's the best of cinema verite, real life. But that doesn't mean Crowdriff's not at work actually trying to make ways to help you capture it when it does happen. Talk to us a little bit about that. And we can take this into the Destination BC Content Commonwealth discussion, but talk a little bit first about stories.
Sure. Yeah. So we found that first of all, this story format has fascinated me. The fact that you have a format here that has emerged and taken hold of like consumer mindshare faster than anything else I can imagine. It's as big as the shift to mobile, in my opinion. And it's this format that beautifully combines photos and videos and text into something that is the most rapid consumption medium we literally have. Like we tried to dissect this, and we couldn't find a better way to consume content than a story. The amount of control that you have over tapping and skipping things, hitting recommendations. Videos have a certain quality to them. Blog posts have a certain quality. But for this rapid consumption, the story format is now being leveraged across WhatsApp and Instagram and Facebook. And you'll see it even someone like Netflix has these little circles across the top now, that these video trailers on Netflix are almost like miniature stories. And so I had an opportunity. We were invited to join Google at a summit in Tokyo where they were talking about something new for the web. And that was where Google announced that they were going to put stories on the web. You can literally open a website and it plays a story, and it's no longer locked into the Instagram or locked into WhatsApp. It is literally available to play and engage with as a story on any browser, on any device, and indexed by Google. And my co-founder Abby and I thought, wow, for a company that lives and breathes travel, lives and breathes visuals, we're like, this is going to be amazing.
So what did you develop?
So you can't just take stories from say WhatsApp and kind of use those, because Google has developed their own framework for this and has since open sourced it, meaning anybody can build on this framework now. So what we did was we made our own way to create these stories. And I've had the opportunity to work with British Columbia for now over 5 years. And when I mentioned in the early days, one of the things that I recommend to all entrepreneurs is get close to your customers and stay close to your smartest customers, of course. And they can help you paint a picture of what the future can look like. And I remember, that's true with British Columbia from 5 years ago, where I remember exactly where I was as a team of only 6 people at the time at Crowdriff. And I was designing our advanced rights system and sharing the designs back and forth with BC as we critiqued it together, and we kind of co-developed that into what is now our advanced rights engine. And so I continued to work with that team. And one of the initiatives British Columbia put in place is this Content Commonwealth. And it had fascinated me because for years I just believe in partnership and travel. And that comes down to a fundamental principle of just how travelers move through, like the consumer moves through the ecosystem. So as a traveler, you touch on everything, right? The car rental, the hotel, the restaurant, the airline. I always believed the industry needs to be more connected. It's obviously very hard to accomplish, and I had really admired how British Columbia had formed this Content Commonwealth with these key pillars of providing tools and solutions to enable their partners, insights and data, and then education. And they'd taken some really meaningful steps. And so when I saw this ability to create stories, and I thought about how it could potentially become the content fuel for that Content Commonwealth, I knew I had to bring it to British Columbia and have that conversation with their team. And so I can share more about that, but that's been, they've now created actually over 1,200 stories, not just by British Columbia, but by over 50 of their partners across the province in this unifying content ecosystem and strategy.
So Marsha Walden and I talk back and forth, and I'm a big admirer of the fact that she has plumbed a new provincial level organization that's focused on digitally distributed content that's authentic. She's focused on path to purchase and hygiene developments for the industry. You and Marsha having, a think in and agreeing on the Content Commonwealth makes lots of sense to me. Talk to me a little bit about the difficulties, because you've got to take that now from the provincial level and you've got to manage to gently but effectively push it down right to the level of the stakeholder. And one of the things Marsha and I talked about years ago on a panel at Tourism Industry Association of Canada is that last 100 feet from the DMO to the stakeholder sometimes is the hardest. How hard was it in BC to finally get your infiltration right to the ground?
It's an excellent question and a good analogy of that last 100 feet. Those challenges exist, and you have to be very alert that those challenges exist. And I think every state and province and country is well aware of them. To overcome some of those things, you need a way to deliver value fairly immediately. And obviously it has to be very easy for those partners to get engaged. And one of the many challenges we wanted to overcome was one where British Columbia can help set a theme or a key sort of direction of content, whether that's a focus on adventure and outdoors or arts and culture. And for those stakeholders across the province that make content in that direction, BC wants to leverage that content. But realistically, BC can't repost on Instagram every single photo or story that every other stakeholder is creating. So we needed to remove the bottleneck. We needed to basically change that from being a bottleneck to being more of a flow through of content. So what I mean by that is, instead of having 1 or 2 people hand-picking what they're going to use from partners, instead, the Content Commonwealth with the stories has created story portals on every digital property. And so when Tofino or Kamloops or Kelowna or Chilliwack, when they make a story, it automatically gets distributed through the Content Commonwealth, and it shows up wherever it's relevant. And so that was one key step. The other is being able to have an early set of partners they start to create stories, and then we started to share reports back. So we would onboard them in cohorts, like 10 partners, then another 10, then another 20. And as we shared the data back, we shared, here's how many people have seen stories. And here's how many stories have been completed with views. So if you were a partner that hadn't made any, you're thinking, geez, I should probably make one of these things, because if I make a story, it could show up on my website, on these other websites, on the provincial website, and it could show up on Google search. And so there has to be that tight feedback loop of saying, these actions result in value, and that value has to be fairly close in time, because these partners are extremely busy with their own priorities.
Well, and that leads me into sort of just rounding out this whole discussion. You wear the toque of radical localism sometimes. Talk to me
Mm.
about radical localism and what does it mean? I think you're a prophet of the future in that sense. So lay it on me.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I first heard Rafat at Skift use the word radical localism, and he said he's heard about it and read about it elsewhere also. But I have become fascinated with this idea of radical localism, or like this new localism we find ourselves in. I think it started with um, I felt um, I felt a strong connection to all these businesses that were closing. It made me extremely sad, and I don't know if maybe that's because for me, building a business and the feeling that it could all be taken away due to something that I had no control over, it's terrifying. Like, it's just really scary, and so the fact that we could lose 20 to 30% of our small businesses, or in the restaurant industry 40% of those businesses, really affected me. And I started to think a lot about my own neighborhood in Toronto, and I started to really pay attention to what those businesses were doing. And I realized that the pace of change was huge. That like businesses, like businesses that I used to go to get a great pizza, they had figured out a way to make and then freeze their pizzas so that you could get them at home and make them at home. Like the place I used to go to for brunch, I now went to, and a little window popped open and they handed me a bag of some of my favorite things to make at home.
Nice.
We made some shashuka the other morning from one of our favorite Turkish cafes, and so I thought, the pace of this change is so extreme that it's moving at the pace of local, I guess if you want to call it that. Only people in my neighborhood know this. Only I know that Areta across the street from me is doing half price bottles of wine right now, and because it's
Mhm.
literally plastered on their window. But how can you get that information out into the rest of the local population here to help these businesses? And so I just became fascinated with this, and at the same time became fascinated with um, the how much I think people actually want to do this. I think for years we've wanted to reconnect with our community, and now there's an environment where we must, like, our survival depends on figuring out where to get bread and eggs again, and like how to go about our lives in this new way that is all about how we depend on one another.
Well, you talk about the pace of that change being overwhelming and shocking. And I purport this: the pace of that change would not be nearly so overwhelming and shocking had the technology that underlies it been sitting in place for 10 years. And we all have this guilty recognition of the fact we didn't really leverage it to the level that we could. We all wake up in the middle of this knowing we could have been more digital, whether it was our first conference call or attaching a Google Doc for a group to look at. We all know we could have been more digital. I think one of the resets coming out of this is we all get that being better at digital is like being better at tennis. You got to practice, you got to do it. In terms of a new world order where we recognize the importance of localhood and digital, I see great potential and opportunity, because as you and I have been advocating for years, that digital interface is far cheaper than traditional marketing, and we both
Mhm.
believe, I know this from our discussions, that it's also far more compelling.
Right. Yeah, from a I think this has created an environment where digital becomes essential. So pursuing digital and pursuing sort of efforts around community partnership and digital, we were things that could have taken a second priority in the past. Now we're in an environment where they must become a top priority, and they have become essential. Part of that is that I've talked to destinations where um, it's likely that budgets won't return to the ways that they were, and the ability to spend on massive sort of brand campaigns may not return to the way that they were. And so this, how these destinations are looking at scale now is scaling through digital and scaling through community. And thinking about what can we put in place digitally that enables that scale and allows it to drive that more natural word of mouth, which, as you just mentioned, ends up ultimately being more compelling anyway. And so the consumer is also coming to expect this more and more. Like as we've been sheltered in our homes and we've been online, we've been communicating with businesses a lot more through Instagram direct messaging, and we've been watching more content online, and we've just been coming to expect everything, every service or product or kind of level of entertainment we need to start from digital. And then as we kind of go through this jagged recovery, we'll move back out into the real world as well. But we're not going to lose that expectation of digital.
Well,
becoming.
and I put parenthesis around that and say the consumer's been far more digital than we've been reacting for quite some time. The consumer was
Yes.
probably asleep to it, but by the same token, they were completely immersed in digital buying, and we weren't selling where they were shopping necessarily.
Agreed. I think the gap existed. It just wasn't as obvious to us as it suddenly is now.
Yes.
Uh, and then the environment that we find ourselves in has also just necessitates taking this step.
Okay. Last question.
Sure.
821-51709. That's my U of W undergrad number. What's yours?
I don't know if I remember my undergrad number. That is a really good memory. You've got a fantastic memory, David.
It's like, as the old saying goes, it's like a steel trap. It'll go off one day and swallow my face. No, so Dan and I were both at University of Waterloo, but
Yeah.
what year did you start?
I started University of Waterloo in I guess it would have been 2007.
That's I started in 1982.
7.
How about that?
I'm counting backwards from when, because after I graduated, or it was my last year at University of Waterloo, I thought I'm not going to take a job. I'm going to start a company. And kudos to my parents for ultimately being very supportive of that, and sort of it really empowering me through those years. But
Well, I think they had faith in your leadership, just like I do, man.
I appreciate that, David.
No problem. Listen,
David, I wanted to add, I've always enjoyed our conversations on the future of tourism, and I've always one thing I always remember about you is this first time I saw you on stage. We didn't know each other at that time, but first time I saw you on stage, I remember you saying that one of the things you said was, I focus so much on how I lead and empower my people. Go ahead and try and poach them. And the thing is, I'll never forget that. You said you encouraged it. And I thought to myself, here's a person who, not even in the fast moving sort of tech space do people get on stage and say that.
right.
Here's somebody who is just like so bold and so focused and so I guess willing to overcome any obstacle, that like I wanted from hearing that I just wanted to meet you right afterwards.
Well, and I said that with some confidence because we had a work environment. We built an incubator, tourism development incubator at RTO4.
Yes. Yeah.
And every person on that list, and I do remember there were about 6 of them up on the. I think we actually threw them up on the slides, but all of them loved their work. They found it to be some of the most fulfilling work they'd ever done. They loved working in tourism, but this was the leading edge for them. So I was fairly confident, but it did result in people trying to poach some of them. That's for sure.
Well, there you go.
And they didn't get poached. That's the good
But
news.
like you said, it keeps you, for any leader, it keeps you focused and on your toes and always doing what's really focused on what's best, and knowing that the talent you work with is really what's powering everything. Yeah.
Well, and then sort of the secret inside of that one was it made me really careful to listen to what they had to say, because if they were part of it and motivated because we were listening, that was great. And the minute I stopped listening is when I would lose them, right?
Yes, I remember that well. Yes.
Yeah. All right. As we close this out, tourism is a vital and precious industry, and I really do mean precious. It's a massive driver of economic development around the world. And at the same time, it's a personally fulfilling and mind-expanding part of our existence. So in closing, what key message do you have for all of us together in this vital and precious industry?
that we truly have an opportunity to rebuild this industry, rebuild it toward a vision for the future, um, that I think we've all believed in for many, many years. And it's a time where we will either move ahead at rapid speed together, or we will fall behind quickly. And it's a choice we need to make as an industry. And I truly believe that we are going to be moving ahead quickly together and driving immense positive change through this.
Well, I want to thank you for being on the show, but I want to thank you more for stepping up in 2011, deciding to make tourism your life and your career. You've been an amazing addition to the mosaic that will make this, the industry that it always has been and always can be. So, thanks for that. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, David. It's a joy and a pleasure of mine. Take care.